All right. So we're going to talk today about something we have not talked about before. Um, Mainly the role that consultants and owners reps play in the construction space. Most of the graduate programs, and especially the undergraduate engineering programs, focus on means, methods, project management techniques, stage gate, critical paths, the design, the execution, the delivery. But rarely do they really spend time exploring and understanding some of these other consultancy roles that support very, very critical functions in that entire value chain. One of the things that is often lost as well in this conversation is the journey and the path from a formal, structured undergraduate and graduate study program into this role of trusted advisor. One of the things that we have strived to do at Columbia and at the construction administration program within the School of Professional Studies is give you guys over the year a few deep and broad exposure to topics or subject matters that touch on the industry, such as low voltage or topics within entrepreneurship or issues that you might come and run into as a small or minority owned business, particularly in New York. I think that we pride ourselves on our really, really deep New York focus, but the way that we present, the way we talk about this has implications for the global market. And much of that practice can be abstracted out and applied to both small and large projects, programs, and even very large agency level portfolios in the US and in international markets. In fact, the owner's rep and the project management function, I think, is one that our foreign brothers and sisters have more experience with. Quantity surveyors, program managers, the likes of Arup, the likes of AECOM, play very critical role in the commercial design and management aspect of project inception. They are close allies of the design team. They're close allies of the procurement team. But most importantly, they're trusted advisors to the owners and the sponsors that initiate these projects. One of the things that we're extremely proud of at Columbia, not just that we're in New York or that we're working closely with our other friends at NYU, like Frank Darconte, who I see is listening in here today, Director of Applied Research at the IDC Hub at NYU's Engineering School, is that we have an extraordinary talent of people to draw from. And one of these is our dear friend and alum of our program, Chris Kollar from JLS, who a few months ago came to us and said, look, this is something that we'd love to surface. It's something that we'd love to talk about, is this role of owner's rep, cost manager, commercial manager, project manager, program manager in the market. Most of our students go straight into the construction space through either working at large GCs or subcontractors, or going to work for the large agencies or the large owners like Columbia University and our Manhattanville Development Project. Less of our students end up directly going into this owner's rep role that we're going to talk about today. So I think that I have babbled for long enough time to give everybody a chance to jump in and get started. And with that, I want to introduce Chris Kollar. He has been a guest lecturer at the program. He has been in the industry for a long time. And I want to thank him for putting together an extraordinary set of project leaders and executives in the space to share their stories, to share their experience, to share with you their own paths so that you might think about how yours might map to that. And also the relationship between going from the owner side to the owner's rep side down in the project delivery side, and how you can weave a really wonderful career dipping into those different roles throughout your journey. Chris, thank you. I also want to thank our SPS team for setting this up. Michelle Trezino, who's our most important program leader. Thank you again for this. And with that, Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Frank. I appreciate that. And thank you to Michelle as well. and Liz for helping to set this up today. My name is Chris Kollar. I am the Vice President of Operations for JLS Coast Management Systems here in New York. The New York City construction market, as many of us know, is full of complicated major projects, ones that require risk mitigation and specialization of professional players. And the COVID-19 pandemic regulations, the economic impacts have only increased those complexities. Many public and privately funded projects of certain sizes require a project manager or owner's rep. And so PMs, as we call it, and owner's reps, who are generalists, who can do business with end users, who can speak with tradesmen to understand logistics with knowledge and respect, can be extremely valuable. Furthermore, unlike other project members, such as construction managers, PMs have an ability to be independent, to be separate from financial incentives that are tied to project final cost. And so we're very excited tonight to speak to Columbia students. The MS in Construction Admin students, and I'm not just saying this because I'm an alumni, can combine their real work experience and advanced studies in areas such as construction law, design, means and methods, historic preservation, etc., to potentially become those valuable generalists to developers, corporations, and public agencies alike. So several months ago, a group of PM firms in the New York City market joined forces to form the ORPM Alliance in recognition of these extraordinary times. And one of our goals was to educate future ORPMs. We have 3 distinguished speakers from the ORPM Alliance here tonight to discuss their careers in the ORPM space. We have Deborah Romano, Senior Director of Project Management at CBRE. Linda Foggy, Senior Vice President and North American Head of Corporate Occupier for Turner & Townsend. And Donald Hickey, Senior Vice President, Project Management and Business Development at JLS Cost Management Systems. So tonight, I'd like to open up the conversation with a question for Deborah. Deborah, seeing as you've been a key leader in the formation of the ORPM Alliance, I'd like you to talk a little bit about why it was created and what the ORPM is currently looking to do.
Thank you, Chris. This is a great story. I think it's a story that's a great example of innovation that was born out of, as you said, extraordinary times. You know, in the early days of the pandemic, I'm sure many of us were having regular meetings about what impact COVID was having on our industry, our employees, our clients, our projects. And at CBRE, I can say that we were having probably meetings at least 3 times a day talking about this. And one day, Frank Alvarado, who is the leader of our tri-state project management group in New York, he had this idea that we should get together with our colleagues, our colleagues in the industry, to form a voice, a single voice that could be for our collective clients. And so it was actually quite funny. You know, Frank was talking to us about this idea that he had, and I said, well, Frank, how are we going to do that? He said, we're going to call them up. So I said, okay, we're going to call them up. So that's what Frank did. He reached out to all of the leaders of all the project management firms in New York. He scheduled a Zoom call for us that week. We all got together, and we just realized that this is something our industry has been lacking. All of the other disciplines have an organization, project managers, owners, reps, we don't have an organization. So we thought this was a great opportunity to come together and not only come together as a voice for this global crisis, but to come together as a voice on an ongoing basis to inform the industry and be a source really for our clients. And, you know, as you said earlier, presenting today with the students of Columbia, you know, is another example of what we would like to do with the Alliance, is be a source of information for the future project manager. So, you know, what started as an initiative to deal with a crisis has now evolved and turned into something so much more than that. So I'm so happy to be here today to talk about it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Deborah. So I'd like to start to get into discussions surrounding career paths. Don Hickey, would you please talk to us a little bit about your particular story and introduction into this field?
Sure, Chris. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to participate in this. For me, essentially, I'll give you the snapshots in terms of a career path that's essentially taken place over the past 40 years. I know I don't look old enough for that, but it's certainly been the case. So for me in the 70s, nothing like that 70s show, by the way, but for me, graduating from architecture school in 1977 and looking for my first job, essentially, at that point in time, there were really, there was a bit of a shortage of architectural jobs with architectural firms. It was kind of a tough time to get placed. And so for me, it was really learning about potential for opportunities on an in-house facilities management platform for companies, and especially quote unquote Wall Street firms of the day. And I basically learned about that from my late father-in-law at the time. And he was a special investigator for Merrill Lynch, and he knew the head of the locations department, they called it at that time, at One Liberty Plaza. And so that was an introduction to that world, essentially. I did not go to work at Merrill Lynch, but shortly thereafter, I did get my first job with Drexel Burnham Lambert. And so that for me kind of launched it in terms of being part of their in-house facilities management group, starting out as a junior draftsman designer. And then by definition, because of the way that department was structured at the time, you became a project manager for your projects, even though your official title was as a designer or doing the working drawings for it or et cetera. And so you really learned that part of managing work for Drexel through that model. Basically from there went on in terms of 10 years with Goldman Sachs and Company. And so my responsibilities there, again, in their in-house facilities management department, were to be a junior member of their 85 Broad Street headquarters team at that time, which was a wonderful learning experience at so many levels. But my primary responsibility was handling business as usual work in their New York facilities, as well as their national branch offices, and then ultimately international branch offices in the 80s. So fair amount of time traveling to places like London and Tokyo and Hong Kong during those years when they had tremendous growth at Goldman. In addition to their domestic offices, their international offices were exploding as well. And so to be a part of that was a unique opportunity that I had, and basically took great advantage of that in terms of that learning experience and applying that later on when in the 90s, I went to Salomon Brothers. And for me to be part of the Salomon Brothers organization was primarily regarding their what was going to be their new headquarters location at 7 World Trade Center, and to be part of that team as well, followed by projects in Tampa, and also another branch office national program of expansion and relocation that took place. So within that period of time, my experience on the in-house facility side was with financial services firms. And then in the 2000s, late 90s, I had the opportunity to go into the media business and joined Time Inc. And that kind of opened my eyes to a different business segment and an opportunity to learn about the publishing world, the media world, what was kind of characterized as old media at that time. And there again, Time Inc. had an incredible amount of work that they were doing between their headquarters building at the Time and Life building in Midtown at 1271 Ave of the Americas, major capital improvement project that was involving the planning and execution of over 30 floors worth of work at that time. It was a significant piece of work that went on for about 6 or 7 years. And so for me, all of that experience that I had had in terms of learning the in-house facility side of it was basically bucketed in financial services and media.
Hey, Don, could
Sure.
I just ask you a question there? It's really interesting. So part of what you've outlined here is you've worked within these corporations in terms of their facilities planning. How much of your role was about communicating with the end users, communicating with the business of the business?
Yeah, it was a huge amount, because essentially in the role of directing those projects, you were essentially the traffic cop between the in-house teams that were involved and the technical team that would ultimately be engaged to deliver the project. Back in the days of working at Drexel and Goldman in particular, we had a pretty robust in-house department where we did all of our design documents and our planning documents internally with our staff, and then outsourced engineering and construction and all of the other support services. But we essentially had a fairly robust in-house capability at that time. That ultimately changed when the outsourcing model started to take shape in so many businesses where those services were outsourced. And so a part of that was born out of the fact that there were facilities people that were part of in-house departments, and then they ultimately went out into the marketplace and worked with the real estate service providers that had started basically disciplines within their businesses to support their real estate operations and their support services, and essentially allowed for opportunities for people like me to be either in-house or on the outside with service providers. And the advantage for being part of those service providers coming from an in-house scenario was that you were thought of as a person who in that role would think like an owner. And it really helped in terms of being able to get the project teams organized and goal-oriented to getting the work done by having some inside track knowledge about what those businesses were like and what they needed. And it certainly accrued to my benefit personally that way to have that. And it also just laid the groundwork for me ultimately to leave Time Inc. and go to work for JLS, who I'm with to this day, essentially helping them grow that business for JLS over time. So I had gotten to know them back in the 80s initially when I was first at Solomon Brothers. I didn't work with them for the first year or two because of my work with 7 World Trade Center, but after that, worked very extensively with JLS in terms of their support for Solomon Brothers operations in New York and basically around the country. And so that by the time I was at Time Inc. and had the opportunity to engage support for the rolling refurb project at the Time and Life building, JLS was one of the competitors we considered at that time. And they did a great job for us for 6 years during the course of that project. And then when that project was essentially done for me, it was a great opportunity to join JLS and be part of that company, which basically brought me to the retained services ORPM side of the house.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing, Don. In a similar vein, Linda, could you also talk about your particular pathway?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the years of history that Don has, which I respect very much. If I have that much time in the industry, but nonetheless, maybe a little bit more circuitous route. So my route into project management was in college, I majored in architecture, and I went on to work in an architecture firm and eventually became a licensed architect. I started out in healthcare architecture, and it was great and amazing. And I felt like, so my journey, you'll hear as I talk through it, is really one of sort of following your strengths, because I'm a big believer in in strengths finders and kind of that management technique. And so that's kind of how I've managed my own technique. So you'll hear as I'm talking through this, I think as a student, it's super important to really not have a particular set of skills, but really just to figure out what your skills are and what you enjoy doing. And so I knew in architecture, hospitals were great, but those are also very long projects. They go on for a really long time. And I am a person that likes to start and finish things. And so
Yeah.
I moved on to retail architecture, and those projects were much quicker. And it was actually a design build firm. And it was a time when the economy took a little bit of a dip, and architecture is sometimes, one of the earlier trades that's hit when the economy takes a downturn. And so the firm I was at had a construction company as well. It was design build. And so I was asked to help out in construction, but it was perfect for me. Once I went to construction project management, I realized it was way more of a fit for my personality. It was a little bit more heads up work. It was more about problem solving, engaging with clients and customers, kind of figuring things out on the fly. It was sort of less heads down. It was a better fit for my personality. So I never went back to pure architecture in that sense of the word, even though I respect the profession very much and I work with a lot of fantastic architects today. And so from there, one of my clients actually was a company called CBRE. It's a little small outfit that maybe you've heard of.
Sure.
My client actually, I worked with them on so many programs and designs that they recruited me over into owner's rep project management. And so it was slightly different than being a project manager for a general contractor, which I was. But it was really phenomenal that I had a background where I understood how to draw the drawings, how to design the spaces. And then I understood from construction how to build the spaces, what it's like to procure the subcontractor trades, how you kind of manage through the schedule in the field and on site. And then to carry all of that base of knowledge into the owner's rep PM world was just a fantastic sort of meshing of skills. And so it was a great fit. I enjoyed it. I was at CBRE for a long time, probably 9 years. Really, really fantastic. Loved it there. Got to work with a number of different types of clients, serving as the owner's rep. And so I mostly was in financial services for a while, the Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Santander, a few others. I got to do some tech sector work, a little bit of Google and some other companies like that. And seeing owner's rep from the different sectors also was quite educational. And you'll find in owner's rep, even though it sounds like a niche, is actually a really broad field, and you can specialize within ORPM. And that's actually what most people end up doing, as you might hear from some of my colleagues here today. So from CBRE, one of my clients was Wells Fargo, and this would have been a shift for me to leave from the owner's rep project management side to go and become the owner was something that I didn't feel great about doing at first, because in my mind, and some of you might experience this, I thought, I'm a real estate professional and I need to work for a real estate company, not a bank. And so I had a little resistance, but Wells Fargo also told me, hey, we're buying 30 Hudson Yards and we need you to come and help build that. And I thought, who could not go build 30 Hudson Yards? So I did. And being on the owner side, I found that it was, I hired ORPMs, I hired architects and contractors and the like, and I had a project management team in house. But I think Don or maybe Chris said something about thinking like an owner. It allowed me to learn a lot more about the front end work that happens before the ORPM is brought in, some of the strategy work that occurs in real estate. And then I think Don talked about when you're in house, there's a whole bunch of managing politics. So again, it comes back to this: what are your strengths, your personality, what you enjoy doing. And I loved it. Really, I loved it. Fantastic company, had a great time there. But Turner& Townsend was one of my consultants. I hired them for cost management, and they came along and said, maybe you could come and lead our New York office. And so put me back on the owner's rep PM side as well as cost management, which was also a shift, but I've enjoyed it. I found that I like both sides. I didn't mind being on the owner side. I like being in this role with the owner's rep side, because it's really nice that you get a huge variety of clients and project types as opposed to being in a real estate department of one company. And so that's one of my most favorite parts of being on the owner's rep PM side, as opposed to being in-house at a real estate company, is sort of the breadth of activity that you kind of get to
Yeah.
see. which I find quite enjoyable. So that's kind of where I am today. I
Yeah,
don't serve in a project management role. I lead a team of a couple hundred professionals in Turner Townsend's New York office, different disciplines, project management, cost management, and a few others.
mhm.
And so that's where I am today.
That's great. And you touched upon your broad, your broad background. And do you think that having, been involved with each of those aspects helps you as a project manager to identify alternative solutions for your clients and point them in a direction, um, with a more holistic basis for your recommendation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. And part of it is when you get to thinking about owner's rep project management, what we provide is purely a service. It's not like a general contractor where you're actually selling something that's tangible or, construction services. It's really about figuring out how to put the right people in the right place and kind of helping a client to rationalize and analyze what it is they need to do to make the best, fiduciary responsibility for their company. And so the more knowledge, the more background knowledge you have, that's the thing about project management. You're usually not expected to be the highest possible expert in any one given thing. You're expected to be able to get the right people to the table to help make the decision or help inform the decision. And so I found having that sort of broad base of knowledge as a background really allows you to kind of know what questions to ask and who to get to the table. And that's really all it's about when you're trying to solve the problems for the
Yep.
clients.
Definitely, definitely. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
And Deborah, could you also share with us your story?
Sure. I actually have some stories about my path that really relate to much of what Don said and some of what Linda said. And in my 20 years at CBRE, Linda and I have not had the pleasure of working together, but it's been a great experience getting to know Linda. So I want to mention how I started, which is I went the route of studying interior design in school. And I started out also working for a Wall Street brokerage firm as a summer intern one year when I was in high school. And it kind of just developed. I was working in the facilities department and I decided to study interior design. And that summer internship turned into a 6-year position where I became a junior architect, and I was low man on the totem pole at the time. So, I got to do a lot of the grunt work, folding blueprints from the old ammonia machines and, getting all kinds of paper cuts. And, but I learned a lot. I was doing, drawings and designing branch offices nationally. And I did that, for 6 years until I was approached by one of the project managers, very similar setup as to what Donald described. One of the project managers there that had been there for a long time came up to me one day and said, "Well, what are you planning to do after this?" And, I was still pretty young at the time. And I said, I don't know. I'm a kid. I don't know. I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing. And she said, "Well, I really think you would be a great project manager one day." And she sent me to meet a friend of hers over at Smith Barney, who was looking for an assistant project manager. And I went on a couple of interviews and they hired me right away. And I quickly adapted to the role. And that was the role that kind of propelled me into project management. And I would say, like, the really kind of important part of that story is that when you're young and you're learning and you're growing, there's a lot of things that you don't know about yourself, and you're not quite yet aware of what your strengths are and your weaknesses are. You might have a lot of curiosity, you might have a lot of interest, but you can't quite hone in on what it is that, kind of inspires you. And I thought when this woman came up to me one day and asked me what I was going to do, I thought, well, this is so out of left field. I'm not ready to think about this. But I appreciated the fact that she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I never even thought about it, but she
Yeah.
saw a quality in me that she thought would make sense. And I adapted to the role, and I soon found out, similar to Linda, that I really enjoyed being on many projects. I didn't really enjoy being on one big project. I learned that I would rather have multiple, smaller projects and have a lot of things going at one time. And so I started to learn a lot about myself. And from that role, I was approached for my next role and my next role. So I can, fortunately say, and knock on wood, that I haven't really had to seek out opportunities. They really all found me. Every single role I've had, including the one I have today at CBRE, has been the result of somebody recognizing some other attribute in me that
Yeah.
I hadn't quite tapped into yet. And it really became a success. So it was definitely an evolution. And it's got many layers of learning in there, and mistakes and successes and a lot of trial by error. But I can truly say I ended up in the role that's right for me. So
That's really interesting. And I just want to touch upon one thing that you said. This profession of PM and owner's rep, there's always, every day you learn something. You'll never learn everything you need to know. And it's a career that sort of is conducive to the mentor-mentee relationship. So you had kind of mentioned there were some influential people that had seen something in you. So do you think, seeking out a mentor is an important thing for someone who's starting out, or maybe is midway through their career in terms of moving forward?
absolutely. And the mentors that I had at the time were all a little bit accidental. None of them were really a formal, will you mentor me type of situation. But they all contributed to where I ended up. And now at CBRE, I participate formally as a mentor in our structured programs. And then in addition to the structured programs, I also have several mentees that have approached me and said, I really, you inspire me. I'd like to learn a little bit more from you. Would you take me on as a mentee? And I have. So I have several people that I work with, and not just in project management. I actually have some that I've mentored, even facilities management, other related fields, because a lot of times when you're growing and learning, it's not necessarily the tactical part of what we do that you need the guidance in. It's really the strategic part and tapping into your strengths and your weaknesses. So yeah, I absolutely encourage it. I think it's a wonderful way to learn about yourself.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I think, we're developing a picture here that construction projects require folks with know-how and a serious focus. And so that can manifest itself in a variety of roles. So Don, my question for you is, seeing the formation of the ORPM Alliance, how does the current ORPM market compare to when you had started out in the industry?
When I started out, that kind of outside service provider really didn't exist. As I mentioned briefly in the beginning of my remarks, while we had a capability in-house within the existing either Drexel or Goldman Sachs in-house facilities management team for that responsibility for those companies at that time, we really didn't have outside service providers to tap into. That business was kind of just starting in earnest and starting to get real traction in the mid and later 80s and into the 90s. And so, with the advent of big time real estate services companies starting to develop those departments as a service for their suite of services overall, and then people that were colleagues of mine who I respect and admire, I'd worked with over the years in various departments that I had been part of in companies like Drexel and Goldman and Solomon, that ended up starting their own companies essentially and have become very successful in terms of either having their own independent firms or being leaders in the practices that are in the bigger real estate services companies. And so, I would say it was at that point in time that it really started to get traction that has ultimately become what it is today, where you've got a lot of high quality firms, really all of our competitors all have, a nice level of market share, especially in busy times, where they do very well, and they have wonderful people, and they're from in all shapes and sizes in terms of the scale of the companies that they are and the types of projects that they do in terms of scale and type. So it's definitely a mixed bag with a lot of opportunity out there. One of the comments I heard earlier, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is that if you're looking for something that is going to provide the greatest possible variety of client types and project types, you're probably better off being with a service provider to those companies rather than being an in-house person to the extent they exist today, where your facilities may be a little bit more myopic to the particular business that that company is. That's not to say that they don't have diverse facilities within that construct, but it's not going to be as wide an opportunity as frequently by being a service provider that you can compete and go out in the marketplace and hopefully land these kinds of project opportunities that are a little bit more diverse in that regard.
So, in this sort of movement from in-house project managers to outsourced service providers that may be working on a variety of projects in some cases, if you compare that to the in-house project manager or even a general contractor on the project, they may have managers that are only focused on that one project. How do you approach that in terms of making sure that the project that you are servicing is getting the attention that it deserves?
That's a question for me, Chris?
Yeah, did I make that clear? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, I think it really just comes down to the project management role in terms of being responsible for everything from A to Z, essentially, for success and meeting the goals and objectives of any particular project. When you're in that role as an outside service provider to a particular client, if you're in a role where you can speak the language of what that company's business is all about, so if it's a media company or financial services company, an insurance company, a law firm even, whatever it happens to be, having that type of institutional knowledge and experience, whether it was because you have a career path that had you in those places internally and that you kind of leverage that to be a service provider to those areas of business where you can flatten the learning curve for being engaged to support companies on work like that. It's basically a double-edged sword in terms of what you can do for a company to create success for them on their project. And also having the experience of knowing, who are the best architects and engineers and other specialty consultants that have a great track record of success for the kinds of projects that you're engaged in, that also comes into to play very significantly for what you can do for your clients and advising them.
Yeah, that's really insightful.
I can
Yeah.
add a little bit to that,
Please.
if you'd like. So in my role at Wells Fargo, I actually had what I consider, having worked on the client side and the service provider side, to be the best possible model, which is I had an in-house project management team and I had the ability to outsource as I saw fit, depending on the scope of the project or what was required. And so for me, it was all about, and I think for a lot of clients, when you're trying to make the discernment between the in-house model and sort of farming it out, a lot of the work in-house requires certain set of skills that's slightly different, slightly softer, I'll say, more soft skills when you're in-house. So there's a lot behind the scene about managing politics, managing the change internally with the business units, managing between the push and pull of what real estate wants to do and what the revenue earning business needs to do inside of a company. And sometimes for a very complex project, you just need a strong technical project manager, someone who understands the nuances of construction and can really manage outward into the field. And so sometimes it's the best of both worlds to have the option to have both. But that's kind of how I think I would usually discern between when we outsource to an owner's rep project management. You just get a stronger, more focused, I should say, set of skills, set of technical competency. And sometimes it's a personality that doesn't want to be so concerned with use 90% of your day is about diplomacy skills, and sometimes that
Mhm.
annoys a hardcore construction manager.
Yeah,
So that's what I'd offer there.
that's really intriguing. So, you know, you kind of mentioned that in your role currently. So, when you are sort of allocating staff to projects and developing talent, what areas of are there particular areas of interest or things that current students should think about?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier in my commentary about in these sorts of roles in owners rep project management, it is so varied, and it seems broad, and there's room for niches and specialties that I would say to the students, having one particular individual skill set is less important than knowing what your own strengths and talents are. And so once you kind of do try, when you're young and you're early in your career, I think it's just really important to try many things. They don't pigeonhole yourself into one particular specialty too early. I think it's important to kind of hop through different specialties, different sectors, different types of projects, work under different types of leaders and managers. Even if you like or don't like them at first, you can learn something different from all of them. And so after a few years, for me, I would say after the first 5 years, I had to allow myself to do that. I'm gaining different skills all the while. Then I can start to really hone in on what it is that I like and really figure out. And I think Deborah used the terminology, she was learning about herself. It's a really, really, really important thing in project management. And then kind of once you do that, and so for me in my role, it's a lot about me figuring out where people's strong suits are. And then I figure out what my client or my project needs. And so it's a lot about making a good match for me in project management, because again, all we do is sell a service. It's really intellectual. We don't provide any sort of product or sell cars or anything tangible like that. And so the big component is making sure that I have that sort of intellectual aspect matched up well between the skill set, the personality, what's needed on the project and the client side. And if you do that really well, clients will be very happy and come back and give you more business.
And if I can also add one thing to that, because in my role, similar to Linda, I'm also matching up talent with projects, and soft skills are critical. I mean, and it's usually, I think the soft skills are the reason why many of us move from a technical role into this type of role, because, we have the training, we understand the business, but we see the bigger picture and we want to be part of the bigger picture. And it's really our soft skills that get us there. So, we tend to be focused on that maybe a little bit more when we're matching talent with a project. The technical skills are not always the driver, right? But there's one thing that I'd like to just say that we don't really kind of call it out that often, or we don't put it on a resume, so to speak, but it's a quality, it's an enthusiasm, it's this, I call it fire in the belly, right? It's this kind of, passion that you feel, that you show for something that you're doing. For me, that's usually, if I have two people that I'm considering for an assignment and all things are equal, but that, one person has that passion, that enthusiasm, that's usually the way to tell who's going to be more successful in that role, because that person will come to the role being very authentic. And that is something that maybe when we're young and we're growing and we're learning, we think we have to say what other people want to hear to get the job or to get the position. And I think being yourself and being authentic, always, of course, being professional and polite, but putting that aside, being authentic and having your true self come through and not responding a certain way because you think that's what somebody wants to hear, that eventually doesn't work. So I think, kind of getting in touch with that quality is really important.
Yeah, that's a point well taken, and it kind of rolls into a question that we've received from the audience. Part of being a project manager and owner's rep is keeping the client's best interests at heart at all times, and driving and chasing in that end. So the question here is, as a consultant, how do you define the value added proposition for project delivery and not to be viewed as an obstacle by team members holding the risk for delivering the project? For example, not unusual for a GC and PM to have a tension between their roles and responsibilities. I'd like to open up to the panel.
I think it's a really great question, and I'll answer it from the consultant and the client side. We're in really briefly though, but I think the most important thing that we do as owners rep project management is to be fair. We are an intermediary between the contractors and the people who expect us to deliver the job and the owner, and it's not our role to be one-sided or always advocating only for one or the other. We are there to look out for the best interests of the owner for sure, but half of the time is spent advocating on behalf of the GC, believe it or not, by some of us to make sure that if they are actually entitled to a change or there is something that has occurred that's beyond their control, or if an owner is taking too long to make decisions and it's going to impact the schedule, it's absolutely our job to go advocate with that owner for them. And even when I was the owner, that's absolutely what I expected of my owner's rep PM. It's not to always come to me and make yourself look great by making everyone else look bad in the project. And I think that's how you sort of start to build trust in the team.
I think also, Chris, something that we have to train ourselves to be is a little bit more empathetic to all parties, because I think once you can be empathetic to each, person or team member's perspective on an issue, it allows you to be a little bit more objective in helping to navigate it. It's almost like you need to kind of take yourself out of it a little bit and really, listen to all of the details and really be able to form an opinion that's not influenced by anything other than solving the problem and having the right solution in place. And I think if you kind of let that guide you, that usually is, the right path to get to the outcome.
Great, thank you for that. Don, would you like to weigh in on?
I totally agree with that. I think, in a project management role, especially as an outside service provider to a client, there are all kinds of opportunities that come up during the life of a project to apply that kind of thinking and experience to, a matter at hand that comes up along the way, whether it's in programming or design development or CDs or procurement of the work, the execution in the field, et cetera. You're constantly in a role where you're having to pay attention to those kinds of things and resolve potential problems before they become real problems to get client happiness ultimately, but to try to keep it done in a very professional way, in a fair and equitable way where nobody gets really hurt. There's always complaining about things that can happen in that regard, especially during the construction process. But a lot of it really does come down to trying to mitigate those things as early on as possible. And so if you're really fully engaged in a project in terms of a deep dive, that you stay deep all throughout the course of the project, you're in the best possible position, I think, to be able to mitigate those things. And that ultimately becomes a value add for the client and the team overall. If everybody at the end of the day can say, we had a large scale, complex project that came out well and hit all the marks in terms of satisfaction for everybody, quite honestly, and that nobody lost any money. That's a win.
Yeah, certainly. So those are all great questions, and I'm really happy we got to that question. So just to change things a little bit, I'm interested, based on what each of you is seeing in the market and the accommodations that have had to be made relative to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you were a current master's student and you have a level of work experience already, what might you be thinking about in terms of staying with your current job, or looking to move within the PM world or into the PM world from where you are?
Want me to start this off?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Well, I think it always can seem a little daunting making a change, especially in the midst of something that's so dramatic as a pandemic. But I think you know, the expression is there's no time like the present. I think if you're contemplating a change and it's something you've been contemplating, I think it is a great time to, you know, innovate yourself. I think we all have found that, you know, as devastating as the pandemic has been, you know, there have been some bright sides to it. You know, I think we've all had some personal stories where we found a little more time in the day, or some opportunities to get to something that we haven't been able to get to for a while. So I think, you know, I would say this is a great time to still take advantage of that little extra space we have in our lives to innovate ourselves and really kind of examine, you know, what it is that we like, what it is that, you know, inspires us, and reach out to people. I mean, building your network, building your brand, that's something that you need to always be doing. And I think all of us on the ORPM side are always looking for great talent. So I would also say, don't be afraid to, you know, reach out to us, go on LinkedIn, look for our profiles, look for our colleagues, and, you know, put yourself out there. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is that someone's not going to get back to you. So I think it's not something to let the pandemic stop you. Just follow whatever it is that's, you know, pushing you. Just do it, and do it now.
I completely agree with Deborah's point. Just the fortune favors the bold. Take a chance, make those things happen. I
Yeah.
like some of the companies also have a graduate development program. Like at Turner and Townsend, for example, we usually end up hiring a number of grads. Actually, Columbia is our school where most of our grads have come from, and those programs are really good if you can find them in the companies, because it's not an intern type thing; it's a full-time employment, but it's a rotational program. So, how I was mentioning earlier, to kind of move around and get different types of experience, if you can find one of those opportunities as you're coming out of grad school, those are pretty nice as well. And the other thing I would say is that some of the clients that we're talking to, especially a lot of the corporate occupiers, New York is a lot about tenants and occupiers. A lot of companies are headquartered here that have significant office space. The tech companies, financial services firms as well. For 2021, it's going to be a slow year for them. But what that means for people in our field and people like you is it might be a good time to try something new and learn, because you're not going into something that's at full throttle, full speed, full pace. And it's sort of a nice time to kind of enter a new field or an arena, get your feet under you, kind of learn for a year while things are slow, because those capital plans are diminished and their capital expenditures are reduced a little bit for 2021. So while it seems counterintuitive, it might actually be the perfect time to kind of venture into something new.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I mean, I think in terms of opportunity, even in terms of opportunities with other companies that may not be in the project management realm per se at this particular moment, but there could certainly be in the next year or two, to be with a company that would be an opportunity to learn the operational side of facilities management that can also lead into project management for these kinds of companies as well, could yield some nice opportunities. There's nothing like learning the business of a particular company and their needs from an operational perspective by getting into that kind of role. And then invariably those companies, when things start to happen in terms of growth, you can be in a good position to be able to leverage that knowledge and apply it to new construction work that is going to be done. In our business, quite honestly, when companies are growing and companies are shrinking, the project side of the equation can be pretty busy. It's when things are stagnant, when things aren't going on, it's business as usual in terms of just, you know, treading water. That's where project management companies really are possibly in a position of struggling. But having diversity in terms of other disciplines within the overall corporate real estate world is something that people should think about. There's nothing wrong with basically exploring those things with the right kinds of companies where you can get your foot in the door and have opportunities come your way.
Very interesting. Thank you. Just to dovetail on that, you know, New York City in particular, with our the large proportion of high-rise buildings in Midtown and in Lower Manhattan, office buildings, there's, most of the construction is interior fit out. So at this time, is there less focus on new buildings under construction and more focus on the expansion of offices due to, rent cuts and or subletting of space to companies that are no longer getting the revenues they typically see? Would you agree with that, that's another reason that the interiors construction world may be more maybe busier at this time? Anyone?
Yeah, I would, so
Sorry,
I
that was
do
a general
think,
question.
no, that's no problem. Happy to jump in. I do think that, I do think that your point is valid. I do think it's a timing issue, because of the whole work from home. They call it an experiment still. The buildings are kind of emptied out, the cities are emptied out, and clients are watching their bottom line, also their cash expenditures. So some are in cash conservation mode. So for us, we think next year it'll be a little bit slow in terms of interiors and fit ups, but we do think it's going to come back, in the second half of the year. And so in the first half of the year, we're really thinking about kind of pivoting into some sectors that have actually been winners in this pandemic. Like if you think about technology sectors like the Googles and the Facebooks, people have been home more, they've had more time to use those. And also media sector like Netflix, which is one of our clients, and a few others are winners, and they are building and they are busy. And so we're kind of focusing attention there. It's good to have a little bit of variety in your back pocket, which is kind of something I think is important to think about for us individually in our careers, so that you can kind of align yourself to where the markets are.
Very interesting. I really appreciate our three panelists participating in tonight's discussion. Again, it's to form the ORPM Alliance. Part and parcel to that is reaching out and educating future ORPMs. And I want to thank Deborah, Donald, and Linda for taking the time to share their stories and their insights tonight.
Great. Well, thank
And
you.
thank you, Chris, for doing a great job getting us organized and hosting.
It's my pleasure.
Great. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. And on behalf of Columbia University and our alumni and our students, we really appreciate this. We hope to see you guys again. As I said, we'd love to see this as a series of conversations to talk about how the ORPMs are making an impact within the industry, supporting their clients, how it's changing with the influx of data, how those are turned into insights, the value adds beyond just project management, but really educating clients and educating the supply chain. So very excited to have you guys here, and look forward to more of these conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Francisco.
much.
Thank you.